Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Genevieve Jacobi from Boulder, Colorado. So we've been talking about Mork and Mindy because Mork and Mindy was set in Boulder, but they do other, perhaps more important things in Boulder. Genevieve and her team, her colleagues. They run a family in Bloom. Genevieve set that up. Was it 2011? I think it said on your website.
Yes, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've got 3 kids, 2 of whom were from through international and transracial adoption. That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You have a good memory.
Yeah. So do they? I don't actually. I've written it down. Oops.
Few cards.
So I'm intrigued. Did you adopt your kids before you set up the agency or after?
I adopted my children before I set up the agency. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And was your experience doing that? Was that one of the things that led you to set up the agency? Or
it absolutely was. My ex-husband is Norwegian, and we adopted our first child from Korea when we were living in Norway, then quickly moved back to the United States and adopted a second child as well from Korea. And that they are now 24 and almost 22 years of age. Yeah. It was a much easier time for adoption as well, international adoption, and not as much information either. Anyway, we adopted them as infants. That's more of a rarity now. And I don't think even then we thought of them as being kind of a blank slate, but there were a lot of issues that arose, which we can either get into or not. However, coming back to Colorado, I then began working after a number of years for other international adoption agencies because I felt very passionate about it. I wanted to develop support systems for my own children, learned a lot more. I did have the right background to be in the field. I didn't have to go back and get education. I had a master's in counseling psychology and had worked in family and child therapy, school psychologist, worked with a lot of different cultural groups, but then became convinced that maybe I needed to found my own agency. So after a number of years, myself and a colleague embarked on that adventure. And she also had 3 children adopted internationally. Unfortunately, she passed very suddenly in a tragedy right before we opened the agency. So I ended up, she died in a freak accident. She and the 3 children, really a terrible tragedy. And I hadn't opened the agency yet, but reconfigured the business plans and how we would operate and went ahead.
Yeah. So how did what you found out, what you discovered, what you learned adopting your 2 kids, how did that impact and influence your setting up of the agency?
I think that we always had an interest, particularly in international adoption, because both myself and Laurel had children. At the time, there was a big wave of Asian children, China and Korea, coming into the United States. Now that has certainly shifted, and we're in very big in Africa, in the Caribbean, also have a number of adoptions, kinship adoptions from Canada and Europe. So we're all over the place, but our focus has been different based on where it's working, where there are needs, and also different experiences we've had. Certainly Europe, because I lived there for so long and traveled and knew many, European languages. But how did it affect it? I think what was such a surprise to me with my own adoptions, my personal adoptions, was, again, I thought they would be more of a blank slate. Getting the youngest age child would be a wonderful boon because I could go through the whole experience and they hadn't perhaps been traumatized as much. And that really wasn't true. I think children have in utero experiences. We know now also from the medical research, the psychological studies, that stressed out birth parents release a lot of, this is in a little nutshell, release hormones and chemicals that affect the development of the child. So someone who is stressed out has a child who is much more anxious, and it affects their own brain development. I think also adopting children from a different culture who had been cared for a few months by Korean foster care or Korean orphanages, they knew immediately that we were not speaking the same language. They had different visual cues of their caregivers. And so that first flight home with each of the children was a nightmare. It was, I wish all parents who adopt internationally or domestically are the ones who make that trip, because it is so tough for those children, or at least it was for mine, but we had many other babies on the same flight and have heard similar experiences that escort them home and already begin your bonding and the changeover. But yeah, that my kids, then we came to Boulder, which at the time and still to a certain extent was a very white community. We stood out like a sore thumb. You can see I'm blonde and blue-eyed, and my children did not look like 98% of the other people in this community. Colorado, I think, is very open-minded in many ways, and certainly Boulder, it likes to think of itself as being extremely liberal and tolerant, and we have like 9 sister cities all over the world. But in terms of who they were seeing and experiencing, and there were also lots of kind of reverse race, what I'll call like indirect racism. Like if there were 5 Asian kids in their school, the teachers after 8 years might not necessarily be able to tell them apart. And that would be very painful for them and embarrassing for the teachers when I would point out that no, my daughter was not talking in class and her name wasn't Mary, and they should know that. Yeah, but so I think that there was this, all of this led into, there was curiosity and interest, but a need to provide support systems for our kids. So we had play groups for the few other children we could find in the area that also were adopted from the same country. Maybe were having similar experiences. We went to great lengths to make them feel comfortable and supported. And both of them are very proud of their cultures because of that, I think. But so there was a lot that then I wanted to go and work for adoption agencies as I got a little bit older. Yeah. And again, as I said, saw some things I thought we could do better. There was also a huge recession in this country, in my country, in early, like 2007, 2008. And I could not make an income working for other people. I needed to start my own agency. And that's the kind of person I am anyway. I like to run the show.
Yeah. So big question then, perhaps focusing on the cultural and the international, the transracial and the international dimensions. What comes to your mind when you hear this phrase, thriving adoptees? And I guess we're talking about thriving transracial and international adoptees. What comes to your mind, Genevieve?
I do think more of my own children first, because what was so important for them, and I don't know that I was ultimately successful in that, because maybe of their own backgrounds and things that were going on in my own family life, was to help people feel very rooted in whatever culture they find themselves in, ultimately, where they're living. And it's more of a challenge, as I'm saying, when there aren't a lot of people that look like them or understand their own country and culture. Because even if my kids go to Korea, the Koreans immediately realize they are not Korean. The way they move, the way they hold themselves, the way they dress. So they aren't exactly accepted in their own culture, even if they wanted to go back and live there, which they don't. But they've explored that as well. So how do you build that kind of rootedness within, like, the immediate family, and then your neighborhood, and then in the city in which you're living? I think that is very important for all children. What works for all children is also going to work for adoptive children, but then you have to go the extra mile.
Yeah. So you're saying you don't think that you were successful? I mean, it's not, surely this isn't a kind of a yes/no question. It's degrees of success, degrees of rootedness.
Well, in my case, we also had, my ex-husband comes from a different country and culture. We're divorced. It was a very acrimonious divorce. And that is definitely going to be hard on any children, but I think especially, again, for children that have had changeovers in their family structure. So, I look at my My daughter, particularly, she was in an orphanage, then she went to a foster home, then she came home to us. And that was all in the first span of the first 6 months of her life. A lot of this is unconscious, you know. We also found her biological family that did not want to ultimately have her be a part of their lives or hold contact with her. So, you know, this kind of theme of rejection and change and who am I and where do I fit in? So they're still struggling in different ways. It could be a lot worse. You know, we all know cases that are worse and cases that are better. But I think, I don't know the studies today. I remember looking into this, say, 10 years ago, and adoptive parents, if they are married adoptive parents, tend to stay together much more in the US than the typical family. The divorce rate is huge here, 60%. Adoptive parents were, at least 10 years ago, only getting divorced 10% of the time. So much lower rates. And I think that stability, again, is a really important factor. Or even if post-divorce parents can maintain good communication and collaboration. And that unfortunately did not happen. So I don't think that was to their advantage.
Yeah. So if this, obviously, as you say, stability is a key factor in the thriving of adoptees, what do you see as the other factors?
I think unconditional love and acceptance are very important. Some children may have a real testing period. We do this in our some of us do this in our relationships too. How conscious it is it varies on the person, but they want to see if you're there for the long haul, if you're going to stick with them.
Yeah. You mentioned a favorite word of mine there, conscious. So how do you see how do you see that? How do you see our consciousness developing as, and when I say we, I'm talking really about, I'm lumping myself in with you as our listeners, as adopted parents listening. How do you see our consciousness developing of the way we're being with our kids?
I think, I know from my own case and what I've seen with some of our, so we have some amazing adoptive parents who may have had many children, adoptive, biological, and then go on to get an 8th or a 10th child. I'm not encouraging that for everyone, but for each child, I think you have learned something about patience and tolerance. And I know for myself, by the time I had my 3rd child, who's my bio son in my 40s, I'm a better parent for having parented and brought different. So just as the children are learning from their different experiences, I think adoptive parents and parents are as well. I'm calmer. I don't react. I'm more conscious about how do I want to respond to this situation? What is really important here? Do I want to fight over who puts the dishes away? No, I do not. But other things may kind of, you're going to pick and choose your battles. So I think all of us are going in that direction of being more conscious and taking responsibility for our actions.
Yeah. What do you think helps us along that learning curve?
It really helps to have other people that you can bounce things off of. It doesn't have to be a therapist either. Friends or colleagues in a similar situation. Of course, with adoption, that's a big part of my world, at least during the work week. And so I have many options, particularly with the other directors. I find that I am more similar to the other executive directors of the remaining Hague agencies than almost any other person I will meet. And I don't know if we've become that way because of the work we're doing, or we got filtered out and we couldn't stick with it unless we had certain personality traits. But I think it's a little of both. And so many of us have also chosen to adopt children along the way. And some have had very difficult adoptions too, but we laugh a lot. We share information with one another. And that humor, as you know, is so important for everything in life. kind of just lightening the load and seeing the other side of it. Because with our kids too, when we're laughing, it's just such a wonderful gift.
Yeah. I mean, there's that shared experience, isn't there? That bonds the family, and that bonds you with your colleagues, as you say, in the other Hague agencies. So the Hague agencies, this is the international. This is the what I mean. How do they call it? Is it like the agencies that are permitted to do international agencies? They're accredited by this Hague
Yes,
organization. That's what
exactly. The U.S. State Department can't do it themselves. There are central authorities, which is the Hague term for countries part of the Hague Convention, and they have an accrediting entity that supervises the remaining agencies. There aren't many left, and there aren't many left that are active in creating and running programs. Many do home studies, which is critical, but there's higher risk. There's more press. We're dealing with people who are have this great need and concern naturally about children that they will adopt or have adopted, and then trying to get them home. So emotionally, it's a powder keg. And I've often thought they wouldn't speak this way or get this upset with their architect or their plumber, or I mean, who would put up with it? But I understand it, both as an adoptive parent and because it's been very difficult during COVID, and also my own government putting up a lot of extra hurdles and concerns, mixing child trafficking instead of child adoption and worries. I'm not saying it never happens, but not on my watch. And most of us certainly are very experienced to know the difference.
Yeah.
So they're frustrated and they're upset, and people are just upset these days as we've had lockdown and illness and inflation and anything else you can think of. There's a very high level of stress in the US, and I think there is in England as well.
Yeah, and the media have always been about bad news, and so bad news sells. What do they say? If it bleeds, it leads. That's what they say. So if it bleeds blood, it leads. It lead the leading article on the page. And I think the social media organizations, their companies, they've because their profit is driven by advertising too, they found that anger is the most angry posts are the ones that get shared the most. And what gets shared, the more that get shared, the more adverts that they can sell you. So the whole system is set up to propagate this anger across the Western world. So exactly, say UK and US, exactly the same, in my opinion. So that's a little bit of a side, sorry. But I do think we don't, until we see that, until we hear that. I've listened to some stuff about this. Until we realise what the media are doing, and they're doing intentionally, we are unconscious of it. We don't right, okay, so it's the profit motive that drives them, whatever they say about changing the world, and that's why they're doing what they're doing, and that's why, and we fall for it. I fall for it. I stopped my subscription to one of the newspapers, actually.
I did the same during COVID. I didn't need to start my day with that negativity. And frankly, we're just so busy. We've been working. COVID didn't slow us down. If anything, we probably doubled our business. We've been just working it. And I have staff, fortunately, that are amazing and also work very hard. So that was a good thing, because our focus was on something positive and necessary.
Yeah. So I want to take you back a couple of minutes to, you said, you were talking about focusing on what's really important. And that's, do you want to get into a fight about the bins or whatever? Focusing on what's really important. So what is really important? What are you've talked about stability, you've talked about unconditional love, you've talked about acceptance. what is it that's the really important thing that adopted parents should be focusing on?
Oh my goodness, you ask the tough questions, and I don't do that much casework anymore, but I think and I love it. I just don't have as much time running the agency. When I speak to people, I always feel like this is the best part of my job, when I actually am connecting with the families, or sometimes children, or they come back into our lives. It's so real. People want to be heard. They want to be validated. Uh, we have our personal experiences, and I've adopted too, and I really understand it. But they also want to understand that this can work. They want the truth about the process. They don't want, in this age when we're talking about media, but disinformation. I think people can sense the truth when they tune in or they hear it. We want to have a genuine relationship with them, and that carries over to all parts of our lives, with our children, with our colleagues. We're not perfect. I mean, this is the ideal, but really expressing who you are, and that again, genuine desire to help and meet them is understood. It's just transmitted, I think, at a very basic level. So that's how we're approaching our work. And when I'm not, the stressed out mom, and but my kids have understood. Here's when I have the time. Right now, she's in front of the computer, giving everyone our full attention, being very present in the moment. And sometimes it's not the right moment, fighting over the dishwasher, but take it elsewhere afterwards and set up the time, because many of us are so very busy in our lives. But it doesn't have to be 24/7. Just having the quality over the quantity, and the genuine experience is what carries people through. So I've said a lot of things there, but do you get the essence of what I'm trying to express?
I mean, I've heard this. I've heard this talked a lot about, because, like yourself, I've done work in schools, and what's become clear to me is that kids have they have that deep radar. They have a radar in their in the gut of the stomach, where there's more nerve endings, isn't there? There's more there's more nerve endings in the pit of the stomach than there are in any part of our body. And this is a detector, a truth detector. And people want to be heard. We all want to be heard. We all want to be validated. We don't want to be othered, do we? We don't want to be feel that we don't fit in, which is why you talked about some challenges with raising kids in a mainly transracial kids in a mainly white area. So yeah, kids can tell. Kids know when you're coming from unconditional love and truth, and they know when you're faking it. We've talked about social media, and it seems kind of funny for me to say this, but it's the other end of the spectrum, isn't it? The kind of fake it till you make it stuff. That is, I think we've kind of come through that on social media to a certain extent. There's still a lot of fakery there, and everybody is presenting the best versions of themselves. But they're crying on the inside as well. They're stressed out as well. Hell, we're comparing our insides, how we feel on the inside, with what they're showing on the outside, and then we don't measure up, right? And that causes some, I think, causes some issues for a lot of us, thinking that we don't measure up, whether we're adopted or whether we're not adopted. It's not an adoption thing; it's a human thing. And the other side of I see on social media, so there's still people faking it a lot, and probably more. the kind of fake it till you make it vibe that was around 10 years ago, that's probably not so prevalent these days. But what I do see is kind of like the oversharing stuff, and the people trying to influence us by using vulnerability as a strategy. You know, I felt like you, and then I discovered X, Y, and Z, and now I'm happy, and if you pay me, I'll show you the secrets. You know, that's the other side of social media that I see. But kids, it is going back to the raising of kids. It is about unconditional love. You can't. I don't think there's anything bigger than unconditional love. So, what does that mean to you? What does unconditional love mean to you?
There's forgiveness and patience with maturity. I think the approach a lot of times is maybe, I don't know if it's instinctual, but people think they're going to, it's all over. You know, something happened and that's the end of it all, the relationship or satisfaction, but it's not. It's just a phase. I often have begun to say to people, it didn't just start, you know, this is a process, we're working on it. Sometimes you fall back the 2 steps, you go up 3. And so I think the sense that you're in it for the long haul, you're committed to it. I don't mean if someone did, you know, the most horrendous things to you, but that's very rare. I think people want to succeed in all their areas of their lives, and especially their relationships. You know, when I think about, because I'm in my 50s now, what was it like even growing up in New York City? We had so much more connection to our community. COVID didn't help either, with kids staying at home. It was very, very difficult for them. But we're all looking for that. And this sense of permanence, again, is part of this unconditional love. I'm still there for you. You made a mistake. We got off track. Now we're going to find a solution. And often that means together.
Yeah. There was, earlier in the year, there was a big story in the paper in the UK about the trustee of an adoption charity here, who had adopted a child, and then it hadn't succeeded, and there was, she'd written this article to draw attention to the perceived underfunding of post-adoption support, and it really backfired. Did this article, and the chief executive of the charity has left, and I don't know whether those two things are related. My gut feel is that they are. But the kids have got to feel, I mean, something's just popped into my head, actually, Genevieve. It's about, you know, I once ran away from home when I was about 9. I'd been to stay with a friend and had a good weekend with my friend, and I thought, oh, I want to be with Eddie. I only got about 150 yards, and then I came home crying. Kids have got to know that their parents are there, whatever. You know, me reading this article from a trustee of an adoption charity, who her reason for not, the article said something like, we asked about some therapy, but it wasn't available in our area. And then I thought, So she's going to say, so we contacted another. So we took our boys somewhere else, but she didn't. She didn't solve the problem, and that made me very angry, actually, that she didn't go on to the next stage to solve the problem. It was like that's a bureaucrat's answer. That's somebody that's not a that's a bureaucrat's answer. That's not a parent's answer. Oh, I got to a dead end, so I decided to offload my child. And she'd written that article herself. So this permanence thing, this feeling of permanence, and our children having a felt sense of that, for me is the key. And I always felt that.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt that. So how do we get our kids to feel that? So I was on the receiving end. I don't know.
I think of the families who have been so successful and often again have come back and adopted again, and special needs children, and they're not families that are necessarily extremely wealthy. It's not a money factor. They just are committed to it, and the children sense that. There's a lot of hugs and physical contact from the beginning, welcoming. I'm trying to think where I saw this recently. Who sent it to me? Oh, it was one of our kids that came home. We've had a flood now as COVID's been loosening up and the restrictions. An older boy, it took a few years to get him home. I won't even mention country, but when he arrived at the airport, I don't know that he'd ever been on an airplane. And my case manager sent me this video clip a couple of weeks ago. This huge family and friends and well-wishers standing there with balloons and just, I could feel the love and the support. I'm not saying it always has to be celebrations, but from the get-go, and they were all approaching him, people that were, I'm your grandmother, I'm your neighbor, and embracing him. And that was the welcome. You are you're going to be part of us permanently, and it was beautiful to see. Yeah. So the tone is set. Some people are more comfortable with hugs than others. It's not just the hugs, but some implicit message that I'm here for you, and my staying power is strong. I'm not giving up. I remember when my daughter said to me, and it just came back to me like you're having these little flashes. It was just Mother's Day also in the US. We celebrate the second Sunday in May. It was early. We just had this on Sunday. So always a very special time for mothers, in whatever culture you're in. Little snippets, but I remember I had always thought they would say it, and it was things they were angry, and she said, "You're not my real mother," and I said, "Oh yes, I am. I am your mother," because I knew that would come up at some point, but I never said, even though every parent may feel this way at times, "You're not my daughter," or "I don't want you." There's some things you are not going there. The child can say it to us. We can't say it to them. And in the heat of the moment, but you really need to control any expression like that, because they're going to be super sensitive, that radar. And if you're a family where you have biological children after, there's naturally going to be this concern that you're going to love them and want them more than you wanted us. And so extra, you're going to go up and down, like I said, these steps, and you have to discuss that if they're old enough to be a part of it. Or maybe you're drawing it out, or I have a book that has a similar theme. But they are processing and taking in so much more than we realize from an early age. And I mean, you're in the field and you know this, but those themes of permanence, of unconditional love, of welcoming and consistency are going to go much farther for an adoptive child in many cases. I really do believe that.
Yeah. So this is something that's sensed, as you say. You talked about sensing it, and then you said about setting the tone. I guess the setting the tone is that in those early days, and you're giving that great example about everybody being there for this for this child's homecoming, setting the tone. But it's about kids sensing it, kids feeling it. It's not a this isn't a head thing. This is a heart thing. This is
every process is different. I'm thinking about, and I've seen this happen. Sometimes it's a love fest from the beginning. Other times you've just been placed with someone you don't know, a child and parent. I mean, it's like if you're going to get married to somebody you don't know, it could work, but you may also have to work at it. And it may take some time. And so I think just rationally saying to ourselves, this may take a while, but I'm in it for the long haul. I'm committed. And the love can develop over time, or just what you're going to get out of. I mean, when you think of the highlights of your life, and everyone's going to have a different experience, but absolutely being a parent has been one of the top things on my list, even if my kids aren't doing necessarily so well right now. But you're planting a little kernel, and you don't know when that's going to blossom. Some adoptive children do take longer to be as successful at a certain point in their lives. And others aren't impacted in terms of academics or their social relationships, but it still was better than perhaps where they could have been, or where their lives could have gone if you weren't involved. Does that make sense? That's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah. And I guess it depends, you used the success word earlier on. I had an adoptee on the show. Who was it? I had an adoptee on the show, and sorry, it's forgotten. I've forgotten who it was that said this. I asked her about the thriving adoptees question, and she said, "Well, I don't think I am thriving." And I thought, well, you could have fooled me. She's out there as one of the leading adoptee voices. That's why it's really embarrassing that I can't remember who it was that said this. So it's like, well, no, I'm not thriving. I thought, and she had it like, we've all got a different view of, we've all got a different take on what the thriving is. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, and we're sold by Hollywood this dream of happily ever after, right?
Mm-hmm.
The end of the movie is happily ever after, and there's this feeling that it will be happily ever after. Now, if you relate this to adoption, we're talking about unicorns and rainbows and happily ever after, and we all know that that's not the truth, right? But then we've got this other, we've got this trauma obsession within post-adoption stuff, and everybody's talking about trauma education, and I'm just thinking, well, I've done some of this stuff, and I think we should be trauma informed but hope obsessed, because no amount of studying the dark ever leads us to the light, right? We have to, the trauma rabbit hole that we go down. I went down, and luckily I didn't go down it very far. I turned around, and there's still light at the end of the tunnel, and this. So I believe in being trauma informed, but hope obsessed. But thriving doesn't mean never feeling bad. We seem to have this obsession. We've become emotophobic. I heard this from somebody on the West Coast, and I thought that's great. Emotophobic. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We've got to. The idea is that well, if I have a bad day, then I'm not thriving. Well, what it's totally nonsensical, the idea, and utterly wrong. But the media are telling us, you're having a bad day, I can help you. You feel the fear and do it anyway. The whole thing's setting us up for failure if we determine thriving on a particular version of success, or an idea that we're never going to have a down day. It's just not true. Sorry, I've lost you've muted yourself. Sorry.
Muted. I wonder sometimes how much of that is our Western culture. When I have to travel a lot in my work, and when I would first go to certain parts of the world and see half the country, was starving to death. They didn't know where they were going to get the next meal. There were deaths, and but they still were actually some of the happiest people that I've ever met. They weren't caught up on minutia or something ridiculous that was getting them down, and they got on with it. They grieved, they got on with it. But they also had to support one another as a culture in order to survive, or that was part of what had made them so functional. And I learned so much, learn a lot. I'm not sure where I was going with this, but yes, it's this feeling like, you can dwell and think about all the terrible things that are going on, or you can accept it and discuss it and move on. We can't keep talking about the same trauma or the same problem that you're having. Now you have to live it and experience and find a way to deal with it.
So I was doing a podcast yesterday, and I've had a chance to reflect on it and to express it a little more eloquently than I did yesterday. The guest was saying that there's no direct relationship between income and happiness. And she was actually referring to suicide rates. So Haiti has one of the lowest suicide rates in the world, apparently, and they also have one of the lowest GDPs. So we're sold this idea in the Western world: money is gonna make you happy. So we're all putting off happiness. We're all postponing happiness. I'll be happy when I get my promotion, I get my car, I get my new house, I get my whatever it is. We're putting it off. We're putting off.
When I retire.
Sorry.
When I retire.
When I retire, yeah.
When you retire.
When I retire, I'll be happy. Yeah. Oh, and I heard somebody talking about this, which makes it even stupider. He was talking about a legacy. So if legacy is all important, then we can't actually be happy until we're dead. So, but this is the Western culture that's working this way, But talking about Western culture, I want to bring it back round to the culture stuff. So you talked earlier on about having, about creating play groups with your for your kids so that they could see some people that look like them. What would you see as the most important things from that cultural aspect of raising a transracial adoptee?
Again, it went back to the theme of having them not feel like the only one, and seeing families that were like ours. The whole country is becoming a more accepting and moving, and where we are today is not the same as where we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But I remember an episode that really broke my heart, and I know other families have had something similar, where my child came home from kindergarten, so they would be 5 years old, and you have to draw, your family picture. And she drew herself with blonde hair and blue eyes. She knows she does not have, so all the dolls that we'd gotten and the play groups, and it hurt because I thought, is it not going to be enough? Everything we've tried to do, but it wasn't enough in that moment. And that was a time to talk a little bit, but then let it go and redouble our efforts in a gentle way, because it just said to me she doesn't have enough role models. Again, it's very different 20 years later than that time. But the thoughts with those play groups, the adoption agency we had used that was specific for certain countries, certain Asian countries, had a monthly gathering where, again, not just for the children, but the parents also could meet, and it was a wonderful initiative. And from that, we broke off into these smaller units because our kids were having similar experiences.
Yeah. And I want to just mention Pam Sweetser runs heritage camps. So this I think that's Oregon as well. If I
no, it's right here in Colorado. It's
in Colorado. Sorry,
yeah.
I meant your state. Yeah. So these heritage camps are a great opportunity for adoptive families. So Pam's been on the show. So check out her episode when she talks about this stuff as well, and check out what heritage camps are doing. That's an interesting one. So when she was 5, this happened when she was 5. So there's two ways of looking at that. I mean, I guess you took it one way, which was, right, this is a sign that we need to double down. We need to double down, and often those things that seem bad at the time then prove to be important because they're turning points. They are signs that we need to do more, right? And that's what adoptive parents do, isn't it? That's what any parent does. When you see the signs, then you do something differently.
Well, I wanted her to be proud of, she's a beautiful girl, of her dark hair and her beautiful brown eyes and her flawless skin. And that's a female thing too in our culture, right? You aren't looking like a certain model, or again, that's changing. But as a young woman growing up in this culture and all the eating disorders and all of that, it just rang some bells for me. And she's never going to look like that. So let's not strive for that as your ideal and your model.
Yeah.
It changed though. It was a period.
Yeah.
I was just surprised. I didn't expect her to. And again, like you said, it isn't all bad. I mean, I'm her mother, and maybe that's her way of connecting with me in some way.
Yeah. So were there any other turning points of that nature, things where you adjusted course?
This is going back some years. At a certain point, for the children, it didn't seem as important anymore when they reached 13 years to focus on adoption or being of a different race. And so really following their flow is important.
Yeah.
It's just at a different place in their motivation and consciousness, or what they want to do with their time. And then backing off. I mean, they don't want to go to heritage camp anymore. They don't want to hang out with those kids anymore. Okay.
That's enough.
It still played a role in in who they are in their lives.
Yeah. That's an interesting one, because Trisha, the adoptive mom I was talking to yesterday, she was talking about kids' issues and teen issues in particular when issues rev up, right? When kids hit teenagers. And she was talking about, she sees a lot of adoptive parents pinning the tail on the wrong donkey, as I call it, so it's like, everything becomes an adoption issue. And because that's what minds do, right? We're looking for simple answers. We're looking for one-dimensional answers. We're looking for black and white, we're looking for silver bullets. So minds tend to do that. They short circuit, right? This is an adoption issue. And she was saying how wrong that often is. It's a teen issue, not an adoption issue. And I was talking about some adoptees, that I saw in a Facebook group, and they were falling for the same thing themselves, right? And it was as ridiculous as, I keep stubbing my toe. It's an adoption issue. It's like it is absolutely. What happens is, they say, I keep stubbing my toe. It's an adoption issue. Does anybody else feel like that, right? And then everybody, because of the nature of the people that, birds of a feather flock together, right? Because of everybody comes in and supports them and validates them. And it's like one of my mentors says that, helium does, enthusiasm does for kids what helium does for balloons, right? It lifts us up. Like the root of the word enthusiasm is the Greek entheos, which is something like the God within, right? So it lifts up the God within.
Oh, I love that.
It's and it makes us fly, and that's what helium does to balloons, right? But what's happening in these adoptee groups is that instead of pulling the burner on the balloon that ignites the helium, that lifts us up, lifts our level of consciousness, what they're all doing is these adoptees, and they're struggling, and I've struggled. I've been there too. So I don't, not judging myself, not judging them, not saying that I'm not different to them. They're throwing more sandbags into the basket of the balloon to prevent the balloon taking off. And so we've got to be really, this validation stuff is really, really dangerous, really dangerous, really dangerous. Like I've had a lot of coaches over the years, and coaches build empathy and then ask gentle questions to get us to change our minds, to see through our beliefs that may be untrue, to break our limiting patterns, whatever. Challenging, questioning gently is what drives change, not all this validation stuff. We've got to see through our own rubbish, I think. So is there anything else that, well, first off, I went on a bit of a rant there. Did that make sense?
It did. You have many interesting things to say.
Yeah.
They don't want to just hear me on adoption either. You are such an expert in this field.
Well, I've just got the lived experience, but and I've chatted to a lot of people over the last 18 months about it. And sometimes I do this. Sometimes I do this, right? So is there anything that you'd like to ask me?
You and I haven't interacted that much. You wrote to me and told me a bit about your own life and experience as an adoptive child, and that you had really decided to focus on this for a period. And I'm not sure if we should do it on screen or off, but I'm curious about how the show's going and the
Yeah.
response you've gotten.
Okay. So we launched 12 months ago, 12 and a half months ago, and we've had 20,000 downloads in that, or 21,000 downloads in that time, and 68% of them are from the US. So those are the stats. I'd always want more. Like,
It's wonderful.
want more. But it's bigger than, for me, it's bigger than that. It's the fact that I love doing this. And I love the conversations that I'm having. And I'm keen to, today's been a little bit different, actually, I think. I'm keen to draw out the wisdom from the guests, because I'm a white kid adopted by white parents. So this transracial, international stuff, I know nothing about whatsoever, other than that it seems to add a layer of complexity, and nobody wants to feel different. If you just look at brands, people wearing whatever the brands that they wear, whether it's Gap or Ralph Lauren or whatever, we all kind of want to fit in to a lesser or greater extent. And I guess feeling different, because the cultural stuff is a bigger thing. So that's why I've been perhaps asking the questions that I've been asking you, because I want to draw that out. I don't have that. It's not, as I said before we started recording, it's not the Simon Ben show, it's the Genevieve show, and I feel I've gone on a little bit too much today, but that's the nature of it, So we've got to recognize those complexities, and then, as you said, double down on the efforts and see these. I guess be conscious enough to be conscious of those like those alarm bells. When we hear those alarm bells, it's time to double down, and also be aware of the fact that those alarm bells, there may be false alarms. Some stuff may be false alarms.
Right. Right.
Like the alarm bells go off too early. It's like the smoke detector that's too sensitive, and we can only know that in the moment on anything. We have to go with that. We have to go with our gut. So, is there anything else you'd like to add before we bring this one in?
The other thing that occurred to me when you were speaking, and I love your analogies, by the way, really enjoy them. I think that we're modeling for our children how to behave and how to take things. So when the kids were smaller and maybe people dared more, they would assume they didn't understand. And other adoptive parents have told me something similar. Not a day would go by when someone didn't either look or come up to us and make a comment, some of which were highly inappropriate, but it used to get me angry and upset. But then I realized it, mostly that they were well intended, except for a few times. And my children are looking to me to see how I'm going to handle and respond to that issue. You don't always want to be in the spotlight, is the thing. You don't always, you could do that as a white adopted child in a white family, but that's harder. And certainly in certain communities, it's going to be harder too. But It ended up working out. It took me a few years though to navigate that piece of it, and I don't think that's uncommon. You have to maybe say goodbye to some of your privacy or your desire to fit in. It's not going to be that way. But there are a lot of really wonderful things that have come out of any experience, parenting a bio child, parenting your adoptive child, and Mother's Day really brought that home for me. I hope it did for other parents, adoptive parents as well, in our country and our cultures.
Yeah. Yeah, we celebrate Mother's Day next month, actually, here in the UK. Yeah, for me, you use two key words there, kind of like respond and react, and we're always doing that, right? We're either responding or we're reacting. So if we're responding, we're coming from where we want to be, and if we're reacting, then all we can do, which most of us are doing most of the time, right? We're not choosing our response. Is cut ourselves some slack on that.
Right.
I see, having done work with non-adopted parents, I see adopted parents as far more curious, far more open to learn, far keener on developing their own ability to respond rather than react. They're far more open to learning, and I think that can only be a good thing. They know that I guess they're expecting some trouble if they're not having challenges at the moment. They're maybe thinking there may be some stuff ahead, and they want to be better prepared. And for me, that's gold dust, because they're far more proactive than non-adopted parents, but they don't see that.
There was a lot of talk a few years ago about toolboxes, like it's essentially your repertoire, but I don't know if that's still in the lingo as much. But what is your toolbox? Like, what are you going to pull out? Like, have the information. What's going to work for this situation? And it does give you more power and control over your emotions and, like you're saying, response. Yeah, there's been a lot of reacting lately in our countries and cultures. We want to respond, not react.
Well, I think the biggest tool that we can have is a higher level of consciousness. I think the world's obsessed with strategies and knowing what to do and all this advanced thinking and preparation. And I think that we do better when we have less on our mind than when we have more on our mind. You were talking about, we were talking about connection earlier on, and it's our own. Well, think of it like a mobile phone between two adults, right? Like the thinking that's on our minds is like a barrier. You referred to quality time rather than quality of time rather than quantity of time, and quality of time for me is having less on our minds, not and because the stuff that's on our minds gets in the way of the connection between two hearts, I guess.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah. So as usual, listeners, I'm going to ask you, in the show notes, there's links to Genevieve's website, Family in Bloom, and their social. And I'd encourage you to check out what they're doing. And thank you once again, Genevieve, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much. Keep up all the good work.
Thank you, listeners, and we will see you again. We'll speak to you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.